The gunshot echoed through the mountain pass just as Amelia Voss stepped off the stagecoach. And in that split second, she knew her carefully planned escape from Boston had led her straight into a different kind of danger. She ducked instinctively, her carpetbag tumbling into the dust of Veta's main street. But strong hands caught her shoulders and pulled her behind a wooden water trough. The man who had grabbed her wore a dark brown hat pulled low, and his eyes were the color of storm clouds over the Sangre de Cristo Mountains that loomed above the small Colorado town. He pressed a finger to his lips, and Amelia found herself frozen not from fear, but from the intensity of his gaze. "Stay down," he whispered, his voice rough like gravel but somehow gentle. "Bandits been hitting the stage routes for weeks now. They will not get you while I am breathing." Another shot rang out, this one striking the wooden sign for the general store across the street. Amelia heard shouting, the thunder of horses, and then the distinctive crack of the stranger's rifle as he rose slightly and fired twice in quick succession. She caught a glimpse of his profile, all hard angles and determination, a dark beard shadowing his jaw. Then it was over as quickly as it had begun. The sound of retreating hoofbeats faded into the September afternoon of 1882, and the stranger stood, extending his hand to help her up. "Welcome to Veta," he said, and there was the faintest hint of humor in his tone despite what had just happened. "I am Kyle Owens, town deputy and apparently your unexpected greeting committee." Amelia took his hand, feeling the calluses that spoke of hard work and harder living. "Amelia Voss. And I have had warmer welcomes, though I suppose I should thank you for keeping me alive long enough to actually see the town." Kyle picked up her carpetbag, studying her with those gray eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. She was acutely aware of how she must look, her traveling dress dusty and wrinkled after 3 weeks of trains and stage coaches, her dark blonde hair escaping its pins. At 23, she had left behind a life of suffocating propriety in Boston, a broken engagement to a man who saw her as a trophy rather than a person, and the disappointed sighs of her mother who could not understand why Amelia wanted more than parlor conversations and charity teas. "You are the new school teacher," Kyle said, and it was not quite a question. "Miss Harriet from the boarding house mentioned you were expected today." "I am," Amelia confirmed, brushing dust from her skirt, "though I confess I did not expect Veta to be quite so exciting." Kyle's expression darkened. "Those men, the Dalton gang, they have been terrorizing this whole region for months, hitting stages, robbing travelers, burning homesteads. Sheriff went after them last month with a posse and barely made it back alive. Lost 2 good men in the attempt." Something in his voice told Amelia there was more to that story, some personal connection to the tragedy. She found herself wanting to know more about this deputy with the careful hands and the protective instincts. But the stagecoach driver was already hauling down her trunk, and several townspeople were emerging from buildings, curious about the newcomer and concerned about the gunfire. "I will walk you to Miss Harriet's," Kyle said, hefting her trunk onto one shoulder as though it weighed nothing. "These streets are not safe for a lady alone, especially with the Dalton gang getting bolder." Amelia wanted to protest that she could take care of herself, but the truth was she had no idea what taking care of herself meant in a place like this. Boston had prepared her for tea parties and proper etiquette, not armed bandits and mountain towns on the edge of wilderness. So she nodded and walked beside Kyle as he led her down the dusty street, pointing out the essential buildings. The general store, the church that doubled as the schoolhouse, the doctor's office, the saloon that she should avoid. "The boarding house is just ahead," Kyle said, nodding toward a two-story building with a wide front porch and flower boxes that seemed almost incongruous in this rough setting. "Miss Harriet runs a respectable place. You will be safe there. And will you be keeping watch?" Amelia asked, then immediately regretted the forwardness of the question. But Kyle did not seem to take offense. "I keep watch over this whole town," he said simply. "But yes, I will make sure you are protected. I give you my word on that, Miss Voss." There was something in the way he said it, a solemnity that went beyond mere politeness, that made Amelia believe him completely. She did not yet understand why this stranger would make such a promise to someone he had just met, but she found herself grateful for it nonetheless. Miss Harriet turned out to be a plump woman in her 50s, with kind eyes and a no-nonsense manner. She swept Amelia into the boarding house with exclamations about the journey and the shocking behavior of those bandits, while Kyle carried the trunk upstairs to a small but clean room with a window overlooking the mountains. When he set it down, he turned to Amelia with that serious expression again. "I mean what I said," Kyle told her, "about keeping you safe. This town needs a schoolteacher badly, and beyond that, no one deserves to live in fear. I will protect you, Miss Voss, always." "Why?" Amelia asked softly. "You do not even know me." Kyle was quiet for a moment, his hand resting on the doorframe. "My sister wanted to be a teacher," he said finally. "She was smart, loved books and learning, but she never got the chance. Fever took her when she was 19. I have always thought if she had lived, she would have been someone like you, brave enough to travel across the country to teach children in a rough town." Amelia felt something tighten in her chest. "I am sorry for your loss." "It was 5 years ago now," Kyle said. "But I still think about what she would have wanted, what kind of world she hoped to see. So when I say I will protect you, it is not just duty. It is personal." After he left, Amelia sat on the narrow bed and tried to process everything that had happened in the space of an hour. She had expected challenges in coming west, had expected difficulty and discomfort. But she had not expected to meet someone like Kyle Owens, had not expected to feel this immediate sense of connection to a man who was nothing like the polished gentleman of Boston society. The next morning, Amelia woke early and dressed in her most practical skirt and shirtwaist. Miss Harriet fed her a breakfast of eggs and biscuits that would have horrified her mother with its informality, but tasted better than any elaborate Boston meal. Then she walked to the church, her book satchel over her shoulder, her heart beating fast with anticipation and nerves. 12 children waited inside, ranging from 6 to 14 years old, all watching her with curious eyes. They were a mix of miners' children, farmers' kids, and the offspring of the few merchants in town. Amelia introduced herself, learned their names, and began to assess what they knew. It quickly became clear that the previous teacher, an elderly man who had died the previous winter, had focused mainly on basic reading and arithmetic. These children were hungry for more. She was in the middle of a geography lesson, using a battered globe she had brought from Boston, when the door opened and Kyle stepped inside. Several of the children called out greetings, clearly familiar with him. He nodded to them, but his eyes found Amelia's. "Just checking in," he said. "Making sure everything is running smoothly." "We are managing quite well," Amelia replied, then on impulse added, "Would you like to stay? We are discussing the great rivers of America." Kyle looked surprised but removed his hat and settled onto a bench at the back of the room. Amelia found herself more aware of his presence than she should be, but she forced herself to focus on the lesson. The children were bright and engaged, asking questions that showed real curiosity about the world beyond their mountain town. When she finally dismissed them for the day, she was exhausted but exhilarated. Kyle waited while she tidied the room. "You are good with them," he observed, patient but firm. They respect that. They make it easy, Amelia said. They genuinely want to learn. Not many teachers would come to a place like this, Kyle said, moving closer. What made you leave Boston, if you do not mind me asking? Amelia considered deflecting, but something about Kyle made her want to be honest. I was engaged to a man my parents approved of, she said quietly. Wealthy, well-connected, everything a Boston girl should want. But he did not love me, not really. He loved the idea of me as an ornament in his house, and I realized I could not spend my life being decorative. I wanted to matter, to do something real. So I broke the engagement and answered an advertisement for a teacher in Colorado. That took courage, Kyle said. Or foolishness, Amelia replied with a slight smile. My mother certainly thinks the latter. No, Kyle said firmly, courage, and I am glad you came. Their eyes met and held, and Amelia felt that tightness in her chest again, that sense of something shifting and changing in ways she did not fully understand yet. Before either of them could say more, a boy burst through the door, breathless and frightened. Deputy Owens, come quick. The Dalton gang hit the Miller homestead. They burned the barn and took their horses. Kyle was moving before the boy finished speaking. Get inside the church and stay there, he ordered Amelia. Lock the doors. Kyle, wait. But he was already gone, and Amelia heard him shouting for the sheriff, heard horses being saddled. She ushered the frightened boy inside and locked the door as instructed, her heart pounding. The afternoon stretched into evening with no word. Miss Harriet sent someone to fetch Amelia back to the boarding house, but she could not settle, could not focus on anything but worry. She barely knew Kyle Owens, had met him only yesterday, yet the thought of him in danger made her feel sick with anxiety. It was nearly midnight when she heard horses returning. She rushed to the window and saw Kyle among the group of men, dusty and weary but alive. Without thinking, she pulled on her shawl and hurried downstairs and out into the street. Kyle was dismounting when he saw her, and his expression shifted from surprise to something warmer. You should be sleeping, he said. I was worried, Amelia admitted. Did you catch them? Kyle shook his head grimly. They scattered into the mountains. We will try again tomorrow, but those trails are treacherous at night. At least the Millers are safe, though they lost their livestock. He looked exhausted, and Amelia found herself reaching out to touch his arm. You should rest. I will, Kyle promised, but I am glad you are here. Seeing you, knowing you are safe, it makes the rest of it bearable somehow. The admission hung between them, vulnerable and honest. Amelia knew she should step back, maintain proper distance, but she did not want to. Instead, she said softly, Be careful tomorrow, please. I will keep my promise to you, Kyle said. I will come back. Over the following weeks, a pattern developed. Amelia taught during the days, pouring her energy into lessons and watching her students blossom with attention and encouragement. Kyle stopped by the school often, always with some official reason, but Amelia suspected he simply wanted to see her. In the evenings, they would walk together through the town, talking about everything and nothing. She told him about her life in Boston, the expectations she had fled. He shared stories of growing up in Kansas, of coming to Colorado after his sister's death, because he needed a fresh start. I thought if I could protect others, keep them safe, maybe it would make up for failing her, Kyle confessed one evening as they sat on the church steps watching the sunset paint the mountains gold and crimson. You did not fail her, Amelia said gently. You cannot prevent illness. I know that in my head, Kyle replied, but my heart has taken longer to accept it. Amelia reached for his hand, lacing her fingers through his. It was forward, improper by Boston standards, but this was not Boston. This was La Veta, where life was harder and more immediate, and people could not afford to waste time on meaningless propriety. Kyle squeezed her hand, and they sat in companionable silence as darkness fell. But the Dalton gang remained a constant threat. They struck again, this time robbing a freight wagon carrying supplies for the general store. Then they hit another homestead, stealing cattle and terrorizing the family. The town was on edge, people afraid to travel alone, businesses suffering as visitors avoided the area. "The territorial marshal is sending help," Kyle told Amelia one evening in late October. "They should arrive next week, but until then we have to be vigilant." "You look exhausted," Amelia observed. Kyle had dark circles under his eyes, his movements slower than usual. "When did you last sleep a full night?" "I sleep enough," Kyle said, but it was a clear evasion. "Kyle Owens, you are not invincible," Amelia said sharply. "You cannot protect anyone if you collapse from exhaustion." Kyle looked at her, and despite his weariness, there was a warmth in his gaze that made her breath catch. "You worry about me." "Of course I do," Amelia said. "I care about you, more than I probably should given we have known each other barely 2 months." Kyle reached out and cupped her cheek with his hand, his touch gentle despite the calluses. "I care about you too, more than I have ever cared about anyone. When I am out there chasing bandits, all I think about is getting back to you. You have become the reason I take every precaution, the reason I fight to come home safe." Amelia closed her eyes, leaning into his touch. "I came here to find purpose," she whispered, "but I found so much more. I found you." Kyle leaned forward, and Amelia met him halfway. Their kiss was soft and tentative at first, then deeper as weeks of unspoken feelings poured into it. When they finally pulled apart, both were breathless. "I love you," Kyle said simply. "I know it is fast, but I have never been more certain of anything." "I love you too," Amelia replied, and saying the words felt like coming home in a way Boston never had. They began courting officially after that, though in a frontier town like Veta, courtship looked different than it would have in the East. They stole moments between her teaching and his patrols, shared meals at the boarding house under Miss Harriet's approving eye, talked long into the evenings about their hopes for the future. Kyle spoke of wanting to build a ranch someday, of raising horses and cattle in these mountains he loved. Amelia talked about expanding the school, maybe adding more advanced classes for older students. "We could do both," Kyle said one November evening as the first snow began to fall. "Build a life together that includes all of it, if you would want that. With me. Are you proposing, Kyle Owens?" Amelia asked, her heart racing. "Not properly," Kyle admitted. "I do not have a ring yet, and I want to do this right. But yes, I am saying that I want to marry you, Amelia Voss. I want to wake up next to you every morning and fall asleep holding you every night. I want to protect you and cherish you and build a life with you in this wild, beautiful place." Amelia felt tears prick her eyes. "I want that too, all of it. Then, when this business with the Dalton gang is finished, when the town is safe again, I will ask you properly," Kyle promised. "And I hope you will say yes." "I will," Amelia assured him. "I absolutely will." But the Dalton gang had other plans. The territorial marshal's men arrived as promised, 6 seasoned lawmen who began coordinating with the local sheriff to track down the bandits. Kyle was part of the effort, spending long days riding patrol and gathering intelligence. The gang seemed to sense the increased pressure because they went quiet for nearly 2 weeks. No robberies or attacks reported. "They are planning something big," Kyle told Amelia grimly. "I can feel it." "They are too quiet." He was right. On a cold morning in late November, word came that the gang had been spotted heading toward Veta itself. They had never been bold enough to attack the town directly before, but desperation made people dangerous. The marshal's men set up defensive positions while townspeople were urged to stay inside and lock their doors. "I need you to go to the boarding house and stay there," Kyle told Amelia as she was preparing to dismiss school early. "Board up the windows if you have to, but do not come out until I tell you it is safe." "What about you?" Amelia asked, fear tight in her throat. Kyle pulled her close, holding her against his chest. She could hear his heartbeat, strong and steady. "I will be fine," he promised. "I gave you my word I would always protect you, and I mean to keep it. But I need to know you are safe so I can focus on what needs to be done." "Come back to me," Amelia said fiercely. "We have a life to build, remember." "I remember," Kyle said, then kissed her deeply. "I love you, Amelia. No matter what happens, remember that." "I love you too," she whispered against his lips. Kyle walked her to the boarding house himself, made sure Miss Harriet understood the situation, then headed back to join the other lawmen. Amelia watched from the window as the street cleared, as armed men took positions behind water troughs and wagons and building corners. The wait was agonizing. The Dalton gang came at noon, riding hard down the main street with guns blazing. But they had not expected the organized resistance waiting for them. The marshal's men returned fire, and the carefully planned ambush quickly turned the gang's attack into chaos. Amelia watched in horror from the window, her hands pressed against the glass, as bullets flew and men shouted. She saw Kyle behind the water trough where they had first met, saw him fire his rifle with practiced precision. One of the gang members went down, then another. But there were still 5 of them, and they were spreading out, trying to flank the defenders. One of them, a scarred man on a black horse, wheeled around and headed straight for the boarding house. Amelia's blood ran cold. Miss Harriet screamed as the front door shattered under the impact of bullets. The bandit was coming inside. Without thinking, Amelia grabbed the heavy iron poker from beside the fireplace. She heard boots on the stairs, heard Miss Harriet sobbing in the parlor. The bandit appeared in the doorway of her room, gun raised, and Amelia knew she had seconds before he decided she was either a hostage or a corpse. But she never found out which because Kyle crashed through the doorway behind him with the force of a freight train. The 2 men went down in a tangle of fists and gunfire. Amelia screamed Kyle's name as they wrestled for control of the gun. The bandit was large and vicious, but Kyle fought with the desperate strength of a man protecting what he loved most. The gun went off, the sound deafening in the small room. Amelia's scream cut off as both men went still. Then Kyle shoved the bandit off him, and Amelia saw the growing red stain on the other man's chest. Kyle was breathing hard, his face bruised and bleeding, but he was alive. "Are you hurt?" Kyle demanded, crossing to her in 2 strides and running his hands over her arms, her face, checking for injuries. "Did he touch you?" "No, I am fine. You got here in time," Amelia gasped, then threw her arms around his neck. "You came for me." "Always," Kyle said hoarsely. "I will always come for you." Outside, the remaining gang members were surrendering. The fight was over. The territorial marshal's careful planning had worked, and the Dalton gang was finished. By evening, 4 dead bandits were being laid out at the undertaker's, while 3 survivors sat in cells awaiting transport to the territorial prison. The town was safe again. Kyle had a cracked rib and numerous bruises, but the doctor pronounced him fundamentally sound. Amelia refused to leave his side while he was being examined, and Kyle kept reaching for her hand as though reassuring himself she was real and safe. When they finally emerged from the doctor's office, the sun was setting, painting the snow-dusted mountains in shades of rose and gold. "Marry me," Kyle said suddenly. Amelia blinked. "What?" "I know I said I would ask properly after this was over, but I cannot wait," Kyle said. He winced as he lowered himself to one knee in the middle of the street, ignoring the various townspeople stopping to watch. "I do not have a ring yet, and this is not romantic, but Amelia Voss, I love you with everything I am. You are brave and smart and kind, and you make me want to be better than I am. Will you marry me? Will you build that life we talked about, here in Veta with me?" Amelia did not hesitate. "Yes," she said, pulling him back to his feet and ignoring his grunt of pain from the sudden movement. "Yes, Kyle Owens, I will marry you." He kissed her there in the street while the townspeople applauded and Miss Harriet dabbed at her eyes with a handkerchief. It was nothing like the careful, controlled courtship Amelia would have had in Boston, but it was perfect in its honesty and passion. They were married 3 weeks later in the church where Amelia taught, with the whole town in attendance. Amelia wore a simple blue dress she had made herself with Miss Harriet's help, and Kyle wore his best suit, freshly pressed. The preacher kept the ceremony short and sweet, and when Kyle kissed his bride, he did so with a thoroughness that made some of the older ladies tusk but made Amelia laugh against his mouth. "I love you, Mrs. Owens," Kyle murmured. "I love you too, husband," Amelia replied. They moved into a small house on the edge of town that Kyle had been fixing up in secret for weeks. It was modest but sturdy, with a good stove and glass windows, and a view of the mountains that took Amelia's breath away each morning. Kyle continued his work as deputy, though with the Dalton gang gone, Veta became considerably more peaceful. Amelia kept teaching, and the school grew as more families moved to the area, drawn by the town's improving reputation. Their first year of marriage was full of small joys and everyday challenges. They learned each other's habits, the ways they fit together, and the places where they had to compromise. Kyle was neat to the point of obsession about his guns and equipment, but tended to leave his boots wherever he took them off. Amelia talked in her sleep, usually about her students, which Kyle found endlessly endearing. They worked together on the house, adding a garden in the spring and chicken coop in the summer. In the fall of 1883, Amelia realized she was pregnant. She told Kyle one evening after supper, watching nervously for his reaction. He stared at her for a long moment, then swept her up in his arms, spinning her around despite her laughing protests. "We are going to have a baby," he kept saying, wonder in his voice. "A real baby." "I certainly hope so," Amelia said dryly. "Otherwise this nausea is very poorly timed." Kyle became impossibly protective during her pregnancy, much to Amelia's occasional exasperation. He wanted her to stop teaching, but she refused until she was 6 months along, and moving around the classroom became genuinely difficult. He fussed over her constantly, making sure she ate enough and rested enough and was not doing anything too strenuous. "Kyle, I am pregnant, not fragile," Amelia reminded him more than once. But she secretly loved his attentiveness, the way he would rest his hand on her swelling belly and talk to their unborn child about the mountains and the horses they would have and all the things they would do together. Their son was born in May of 1884, a robust baby with Kyle's gray eyes and a surprisingly loud cry. They named him Jonah, and Kyle held him with such tender care that Amelia fell in love with her husband all over again watching them together. "He is perfect," Kyle whispered, tears streaming unashamedly down his face. "You are both perfect." Motherhood was harder than Amelia had anticipated, but also more rewarding. She loved the weight of Jonah in her arms, the way he would curl his tiny hand around her finger, the soft sounds he made when nursing. Kyle was an attentive father, walking the floor with Jonah at night when he was fussy, changing diapers without complaint, singing off-key lullabies that somehow always worked. Amelia returned to teaching part-time when Jonah was 6 months old, bringing him with her to school. The students were enchanted with the baby, and the older girls took turns helping watch him during lessons. It was unconventional, but this was La Veta, not Boston, and people made things work. 2 years later, their daughter arrived, a tiny thing with Amelia's blonde hair and Kyle's determined chin. They named her Grace, and Jonah was fascinated with his baby sister, wanting to help with everything. Kyle built an addition onto the house, adding 2 bedrooms and a larger kitchen. The town continued to grow, and so did the school. Amelia hired an assistant teacher, a young woman from Denver named Catherine, who had the same passion for education that Amelia did. In 1887, Kyle left his position as deputy to focus on the ranch he had been building. He had been buying land gradually over the years, and now he had enough acreage to support a small herd of cattle and horses. Amelia loved watching him work the land, loved seeing him come home dusty and tired but satisfied in a way the deputy work had never quite achieved. "This is what I dreamed of," Kyle told her one evening as they sat on the porch watching Jonah and Grace play in the yard. "A family land of my own, a purpose beyond just reacting to trouble. You gave me this, Amelia. You gave me everything." "We gave it to each other," Amelia corrected. "I would never have found this life without you." The years passed in a blur of growth and change. Jonah grew into a serious boy who loved books like his mother, but also had his father's way with horses. Grace was a whirlwind of energy and opinions, fearless in a way that both terrified and delighted her parents. In 1890, another son joined them, Samuel, who was quieter than his siblings but had an artist's eye for beauty. The school expanded again, now housed in a dedicated building with 3 classrooms. Amelia served on the town council, advocating for better roads and a lending library. Kyle's ranch prospered, his horses gaining a reputation for quality across the territory. They were not wealthy by Boston standards, but they had more than enough, and their children wanted for nothing important. In 1893, 11 years after Amelia had stepped off that stagecoach into gunfire, she stood on the same main street of La Veta watching a parade celebrating Colorado's statehood. Jonah was 9 now, Grace 7, and Samuel 3. Kyle stood beside her with Samuel on his shoulders, his arm around her waist, and Amelia marveled at how much life they had built together. "Do you ever regret leaving Boston?" Kyle asked, as though reading her thoughts. Amelia looked up at her husband, at the man who had kept his promise to protect her always, who had shown her what real love looked like through 1,000 small acts of devotion and care. "Not even for a moment," she said honestly. "You are my home, Kyle. You and our children and this wild, beautiful place. I found everything I was looking for here." "I love you," Kyle said, leaning down to kiss her temple. "I have loved you since the moment I pulled you behind that water trough, though I did not know it yet." "I love you too," Amelia replied. "Always." That night, after the children were asleep and the house was quiet, Kyle and Amelia sat together on their porch as they had countless times before. The mountains loomed dark against the star-filled sky, and somewhere in the distance, a coyote called. Kyle took Amelia's hand, running his thumb over her knuckles in that familiar, comforting gesture. "Tell me what you are thinking," he said softly. Amelia considered how to put her feelings into words. "I am thinking about that girl who stepped off the stagecoach all those years ago. She was running from one life, hoping to find another, but she had no idea what she was really looking for. She thought she wanted independence and purpose, and she found those things. But she also found something she did not even know she needed." "What was that?" Kyle asked. "You," Amelia said simply. "A partner who sees me as an equal, A love that is not about possession or control but about mutual respect and support. The knowledge that I matter to someone not because of what I can provide but because of who I am. Kyle brought her hand to his lips, kissing her knuckles. You matter to me more than anything else in this world except our children, and even they exist because of what we built together. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, the kind of silence that only comes with years of knowing someone completely. Amelia thought about all the moments that had led them here. The gunfire on her first day, Kyle's promise to protect her, their courtship, the danger that had tested his commitment, the years of building a life together. It had not always been easy, this life in the mountains. There had been hard winters and lean times, illnesses and losses. But through it all, they had faced everything together. I want to tell you something, Kyle said eventually, something I have never told anyone. Amelia turned to face him, curious and attentive. When my sister died, I was angry at God for a long time, Kyle continued. I could not understand why someone so good, with so much potential, would be taken while bad people lived. I stopped praying, stopped going to church except when duty required it. I went through the motions of living, but I felt hollow inside. He paused, gathering his thoughts. Then you arrived, stepping off that stagecoach right into danger, and something in me woke up. It was like I had been given a second chance at something, though I did not understand what at first. As I got to know you, I realized you reminded me of my sister, yes, but you were also your own person. Smart and brave and determined to make a difference. You made me want to be the man you thought I was. You were already that man, Amelia said gently. Maybe, Kyle allowed. But you helped me see it. And when that bandit came for you, when I saw him breaking into the boarding house, I have never known fear like that. The thought of losing you, of failing to keep my promise, was unbearable. Fighting him was not about duty or even basic decency. It was about protecting the woman I loved with everything in me. You did protect me, Amelia reminded him. You kept your word. And I always will, Kyle promised. For as long as I draw breath, you and our children will be safe. That is my vow to you, renewed every day. Amelia leaned her head against Kyle's shoulder, feeling the solid warmth of him, the steady beat of his heart. I know, she whispered. I have always known. From that very first day when you made that promise, something in me recognized that you meant it. You are a man of your word, Kyle Owens. The following years brought more changes and challenges. Jonah went off to college in Denver in 1899, the first in their family to pursue higher education. It was bittersweet watching him leave, but Amelia and Kyle were immensely proud. Grace proved to be a natural teacher and began helping at the school while deciding her own path. Samuel surprised them all by showing a talent for veterinary work, spending hours with the ranch animals, and studying every book on animal husbandry he could find. In 1901, the town of Veta celebrated its 25th anniversary with a grand festival. Amelia and Kyle, now in their early 40s, were honored as founding citizens who had contributed so much to the community's growth. Amelia's school had educated hundreds of children over the years, many of whom had gone on to successful careers across the state. Kyle's ranch was one of the most successful in the region, and he had trained several young men in horse breeding and ranching skills. We have done well, Kyle said as they walked through the festival, watching their children and grandchildren playing together. Jonah had married a young woman from Denver, and they had 2 children of their own now. Grace was engaged to a schoolteacher from Pueblo. Samuel, at 14, was still young but already showing signs of the man he would become. We have, Amelia agreed. Not because we had some grand plan, but because we chose each other every day, because we built something together based on love and trust. That night, Exhausted but happy, they returned to their ranch house. It had been expanded several more times over the years and was now a sprawling, comfortable home filled with memories. Photographs lined the walls, showing the progression of their family. Books crowded the shelves, evidence of Amelia's continued love of learning. Kyle's saddle and gear had a place of honor near the door. As they prepared for bed, Kyle pulled Amelia close. "Do you remember the first time I kissed you?" he asked. "On the church steps," Amelia said immediately. "After you told me you loved me. It was October, and the leaves were changing colors." "I was terrified," Kyle admitted. "I had never felt that way about anyone before. I was afraid you would reject me, or that I was not good enough for an educated woman from Boston." "You were always good enough," Amelia said firmly. "You are the best man I have ever known, kind and brave and honorable." "I was the lucky one, Kyle." "We were both lucky," Kyle corrected. "Lucky to find each other in this vast world. Lucky that you happened to arrive in Veta on the day the Dalton gang attacked. Lucky that I was there to protect you." "Not luck," Amelia said thoughtfully. "I do not believe it was luck. I think we were meant to find each other. Some things are just meant to be." They made love that night with the tenderness and familiarity of long years together, but also with the passion that had never quite faded despite time and age. Afterward, lying in each other's arms, they talked about their children and grandchildren, about the future of the ranch and the school, about all the ordinary and extraordinary things that made up their shared life. The years continued to pass. Amelia finally retired from teaching in 1905 at the age of 46, handing the school over to Grace, who had proven to be an exceptional educator. Kyle scaled back his ranching operations, letting Jonah take over the day-to-day management while he focused on breeding horses, which had always been his true passion. Samuel went off to veterinary school in Fort Collins, sending long letters home about his studies and his dreams of opening a practice in Veta. In 1908, Amelia and Kyle celebrated their 26th wedding anniversary with a quiet dinner at home, just the two of them. Their children were grown and scattered, though all still close enough to visit regularly. The house felt both too big and just right, echoing with memories of the family that had filled it for so many years. "You know what I am most grateful for?" Amelia asked as they sat by the fire after dinner. "Tell me," Kyle encouraged. "That I had the courage to step off that stagecoach," Amelia said. "That I did not let fear keep me in Boston living a life that would have suffocated me, that I was brave enough to reach for something more." "And I am grateful you chose me," Kyle said. "That you saw past the rough exterior to the man underneath, that you trusted me to keep my promise." "You have kept it every single day," Amelia said softly, "not just in the obvious ways protecting me from physical danger, but in all the small ways too. Supporting my dreams, encouraging my work, being a true partner. You have protected my heart, Kyle. You have kept it safe and helped it grow." Kyle reached for her hand, his own showing the signs of age now, scarred and weathered but still strong. "Loving you has been the easiest thing I have ever done. Being worthy of your love has been the challenge of my life, but I hope I have managed it." "More than managed," Amelia assured him. "You have exceeded every hope I had. You showed me what real love looks like." They sat together as the fire burned down, comfortable in the silence that needed no words. Outside, the mountains stood eternal and unchanging, witnesses to their love story. Inside, the house that they had built together held decades of memories, of laughter and tears, of ordinary days and extraordinary moments. In 1910, Samuel returned to Veta and opened his veterinary practice, much to the relief of local ranchers who had been traveling to larger towns for animal care. He courted a young woman named Elizabeth who worked at the general store, and they were married in the same church where his parents had wed. Grace had 3 children by then, all of them fascinated by their grandmother's stories of teaching and their grandfather's tales of the old days when Veta was still wild. Jonah had expanded the ranch significantly, adding more land and diversifying into sheep as well as cattle. He consulted Kyle frequently, valuing his father's decades of experience. The 2 men would ride the property together, Kyle on his favorite horse, a gray mare named Silver, discussing plans and problems. These rides were among Kyle's favorite times, seeing his son carry forward the legacy he had built. One evening in the summer of 1912, 30 years after they had met, Kyle and Amelia sat on their porch watching the sunset. At 53 and 52, respectively, they were aging gracefully, their hair graying but their minds sharp and their love as strong as ever. Amelia was knitting a blanket for their newest grandchild, and Kyle was repairing a bridle, their hands busy with familiar tasks. "I want you to know something," Kyle said suddenly, setting aside the bridle. "When my time comes, whenever that may be, I want you to know I have lived a full life, a happy life, because of you." Amelia set down her knitting, troubled by the serious tone. "Why are you talking about this now?" "No particular reason," Kyle assured her. "I am healthy and plan to be around for many more years, but I want you to know, in case I do not say it enough, that you have been my greatest blessing. These 30 years with you have been worth more than anything else I might have done or been." Amelia moved to sit beside him, taking his hand. "And you have been mine. You kept your promise, Kyle. You protected me always. Not just my body, but my spirit, my dreams, everything that makes me who I am. You gave me room to grow while also giving me roots. That is the truest form of protection there is." "I love you," Kyle said simply. "I love you too," Amelia replied. "Always." They sat together as the sky darkened and stars began to appear, 2 people who had found each other against all odds and built something beautiful. The ranch spread out around them, productive and thriving. The town of Veta had grown into a proper community with schools and churches and businesses. Their children were happy and successful, their grandchildren healthy and loved. It was, Amelia thought, exactly the life she had been seeking when she fled Boston all those years ago, though she had not known it then. She had wanted independence, and discovered that true independence came not from being alone but from being with someone who respected your autonomy. She had wanted purpose and found it in teaching, in motherhood, in being part of a community. But most of all, she had found love, real and true and lasting, the kind of love that kept promises, the kind of love that protected without possessing, supported without smothering, endured without fading. Kyle had shown her that kind of love was possible, and in doing so, had given her the greatest gift of all, the certainty that she was valued and cherished exactly as she was. In the spring of 1914, Veta's school board decided to name the main school building Voss Hall in honor of Amelia's 3 decades of service to education in the town. The dedication ceremony brought tears to Amelia's eyes as former students, now adults with children of their own, shared stories of how she had impacted their lives. Kyle stood beside her, proud and beaming, his hand at the small of her back in that familiar, supportive gesture. "You have touched so many lives," he murmured to her as they walked home that evening. "Changed the course of this entire town by giving its children the tools to dream bigger." "I just taught them to read and think," Amelia protested. "You taught them that someone believed in them," Kyle corrected. "That their minds mattered, that they could be more than they imagined. That is everything, Amelia." As they approached their house, Amelia paused to look at it with fresh eyes. It had started as a small cabin and grown over the years into a sprawling home that had sheltered 3 children and countless memories. The garden she tended bloomed with vegetables and flowers. The barn held Kyle's beloved horses. The whole property spoke of lives well lived and love that had endured. "We did good, did we not?" she asked Kyle. "We did better than good," Kyle replied. "We did extraordinary." That summer brought a reunion of sorts, with all 3 of their children and 8 grandchildren gathering at the ranch for a week. The house overflowed with noise and chaos and laughter. Jonah's oldest son, now 15, shadowed his grandfather everywhere, soaking up Kyle's knowledge about horses and ranching. Grace's daughters helped Amelia in the garden and kitchen, learning family recipes and stories. Samuel's young son was fascinated by everything, asking endless questions about the old days. One evening, with everyone gathered on the porch after dinner, young Thomas asked his grandmother to tell the story of how she and Grandpa Kyle had met. "Well," Amelia began, settling into her rocking chair with a smile, "I stepped off a stagecoach in the middle of a gunfight, and your grandfather saved my life before I even knew his name." The children leaned forward, entranced, as Amelia spun the tale. She told them about the Dalton gang and the promise Kyle had made about their courtship and the danger that had tested them. Kyle added details here and there, making the children laugh with his descriptions of how nervous he had been courting an educated Boston lady. "But Grandpa kept his promise," Amelia concluded. "When danger came, he protected me just like he said he would. And in doing that, he showed me what real love looked like. Not flowers and pretty words, though he gave me those too, but action and commitment and choosing me every single day." "That is what love is," Kyle added, looking at his children and grandchildren. "It is not just a feeling, though feelings matter. It is a choice you make repeatedly. To put someone else first, to keep your promises, to stand by them when times are hard. Your grandmother and I have had our share of hard times over the years, but we faced them together, and that made all the difference." As the sun set and the children were herded off to bed by their parents, Amelia and Kyle remained on the porch. Grace came out to join them briefly, settling on the steps at their feet. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for showing us what a marriage should look like. Every relationship I have seen over the years, I have measured against what you two have. David and I work hard to have what you have." "It is worth the work," Kyle assured her. "Every bit of it." After Grace went inside, Amelia reached for Kyle's hand. "She is right, you know. We did give them something valuable, not just life, but an example of how to live it well." "They gave us something too," Kyle said. "Purpose and joy and all these years of meaning. I cannot imagine what my life would have been without you in them." "Lonely," Amelia said. "Hollow. I know because I remember what it felt like before you, before all of this. I was going through the motions in Boston, living a life that looked right but felt wrong. You gave me permission to be fully myself." "You gave yourself that permission," Kyle corrected gently. "I just loved who you already were." The years flowed onward like the mountain streams that fed Veta's valley. Amelia took up painting in her later years, capturing the beauty of the landscape she loved. Kyle slowed down gradually, still riding but no longer doing the heavy ranch work. They watched their grandchildren grow, celebrated weddings and births, mourned losses when old friends passed away. In 1920, on the afternoon of their 38th wedding anniversary, Kyle took Amelia for a ride up into the mountains. It was something they had done countless times over the decades, but it never grew old. They rode to a meadow high up where wildflowers bloomed in profusion and the view stretched for miles. "This is where I first knew I wanted to marry you," Kyle said as they dismounted and spread a blanket. We came up here for a picnic, remember? You were telling me about your dreams for the school and the sun was in your hair, and I thought, this is the woman I want to spend my life with. I remember, Amelia said. I was nervous because I was falling in love with you but afraid to admit it. Afraid it was too fast, too impractical, too much of a risk. And now, Kyle asked. Now I know it was the best decision I ever made, Amelia replied. Loving you, marrying you, building this life, I would do it all again in a heartbeat. They ate the lunch they had brought and talked about everything and nothing, comfortable in the way only decades of partnership can create. When they finally headed back down the mountain, as the sun began to set, Amelia felt a deep sense of contentment. This was her life, the one she had chosen, and it had exceeded every dream. The 1920s brought more changes. The world was modernizing rapidly, with automobiles becoming more common and electricity reaching even small towns like Veta. Kyle and Amelia watched with fascination and some bemusement as the world transformed around them. But the essentials remained unchanged: family, community, love. In 1925, they celebrated their 43rd anniversary surrounded by children, grandchildren, and now great-grandchildren. The gathering filled the ranch house and spilled out into the yard. Amelia looked at the sea of faces, all connected to her and Kyle by blood and love, and felt overwhelmed with gratitude. Look what we created, she whispered to Kyle as they watched the youngest great-grandchildren playing under the watchful eyes of their parents. Look what we created together, Kyle corrected. None of this exists without both of us, without the partnership we built. That night, as they lay in bed in the house that had been their home for over 40 years, Amelia reflected on the journey that had brought her here. She was 66 years old now, her body showing the inevitable signs of age, but her mind was sharp and her heart was full. Beside her, Kyle slept peacefully, his breathing even and steady. She thought about the girl she had been at 23, fleeing a life that felt like a cage, hoping for something more. She had found it in this wild place with this good man, building something real and lasting. The promise Kyle had made that first day had been kept in countless ways over countless days. He had protected her, supported her, loved her with a steadiness that never wavered, and she had loved him back with equal dedication. They had protected each other, really, shielding one another from loneliness and despair, creating a safe harbor in a sometimes turbulent world. Their love had not been perfect because no human love is, but it had been real and true and enduring. As Amelia drifted off to sleep, she felt Kyle's arm tighten around her waist in an unconscious gesture of connection. Even in sleep, they reached for each other. It had always been this way from the beginning. Two people who had found each other and refused to let go, who had built a life of meaning and purpose and deep, abiding love. The next morning dawned clear and beautiful. Kyle woke Amelia with coffee and a kiss, as he had done thousands of times before. They ate breakfast together, planned their day, bickered mildly about whether the garden needed more watering. It was ordinary and precious, the kind of moment that makes up a life. "I love you," Kyle said as he prepared to head out to the barn. "Have I told you that today?" "You just did," Amelia replied with a smile, "but I never get tired of hearing it." "Good," Kyle said, "because I plan to keep saying it for whatever time we have left." They had been married 43 years at that point, together for 44. They would go on to celebrate many more anniversaries, watching their family continue to grow and flourish. But in that moment, standing in their kitchen with morning sunlight streaming through the windows, they had everything they needed: a promise kept, a love that had endured, a life built together that mattered. When people in Veta told stories about the early days, about how the town had grown from a rough mining settlement into a thriving community. They always mentioned Amelia and Kyle Owens, the teacher from Boston who had brought education and culture to the frontier, the cowboy who had protected her and loved her and shown everyone what a good man looked like. But the most important story was the one known only to the two of them, the private story of how they had chosen each other day after day, year after year. How a promise made in the chaos of violence had been kept through decades of peace. How danger had tested them once and proven the strength of their bond. How real love, the kind that lasts, is built not in grand gestures but in the accumulation of ordinary moments, of coffee and kisses, of sitting on the porch watching sunsets, of weathering storms together. Amelia had come west looking for independence and found something better. Interdependence, the knowing that you are stronger together than apart. Kyle had made a promise to protect her, and he had kept it, not just from physical threats but from loneliness, from doubt, from the thousand small hurts that life inflicts. And she had protected him too in her own way. From the guilt he carried about his sister, from the emptiness that had threatened to swallow him, from the fear that he was not enough. She had seen him truly and loved him completely, and in doing so had given him the greatest gift, the certainty that he mattered, that his life had purpose and meaning. Together, they had built something lasting. A family, yes, but also a partnership that had weathered every storm. A love that had not faded with time but had deepened, growing richer with each passing year. They had shown everyone around them that real love existed, not in fairy tales but in the daily choice to honor your commitments, to protect what matters most, to build a life of meaning with someone who sees you truly. As the years continued to pass, as they moved through their 60s and into their 70s, Amelia and Kyle remained each other's touchstone. When Kyle's health began to fail in his mid-70s, Amelia cared for him with the same devotion he had always shown her. When Amelia struggled with arthritis that made painting difficult, Kyle adapted her easel and brushes so she could continue the hobby she loved. They celebrated their 50th wedding anniversary in 1933 with a gathering that rivaled the original wedding. 5 of their 8 grandchildren were married by then, and great-grandchildren abounded. The party filled the ranch and spilled out across the property that Kyle and Jonah had built into one of the most successful in the region. 50 years, Kyle marveled as they cut the cake. It feels like both forever and no time at all. Because we have been happy, Amelia said. Time passes differently when you are happy. It both races by and stretches out infinitely. That night, exhausted but content, they sat together in their bedroom. Kyle had given Amelia a locket with pictures of their 3 children, and she had given him a hand-painted portrait of the ranch at sunset. They admired their gifts and each other, decades of love visible in every glance. "Thank you," Kyle said softly, "for saying yes all those years ago. For taking a chance on a cowboy who did not have much to offer except his heart." "You had everything to offer," Amelia replied. "You just did not know it yet. Thank you for keeping your promise, for protecting me, for loving me, for building this beautiful life with me." Kyle pulled her close, and they held each other as they had countless times before, drawing strength and comfort from the familiar embrace. Outside, the mountains stood eternal. Inside, the house held 50 years of memories, of laughter and tears, of raising children and building a legacy. But most importantly, it held love. Real, true, lasting love. The kind of love that keeps promises. The kind of love that weathers every storm. The kind of love that Amelia had not even known she was searching for when she stepped off that stagecoach in 1882, but had found in the most unexpected way. Kyle had promised to protect her always. When danger came, he had kept his word. And in doing so, he had shown Amelia that real love existed, not in fairy tales or romance novels, but in the daily choice to honor your commitments, to stand by the person you have chosen, to build something lasting together. That was the real story, the one that mattered most. Two people who had found each other in the vast wilderness of the American West and created something beautiful. A partnership built on trust and respect, a family built on love, a legacy that would endure long after they were gone. As Amelia drifted off to sleep in Kyle's arms that night, she thought about the journey that had brought them here. All the twists and turns, the moments of fear and joy, the daily accumulation of ordinary moments that had added up to an extraordinary life. She had come west as a young woman seeking something she could not quite name. She had found it in Kyle Owens, in his steadfast love and unwavering commitment, in the life they had built together. Real love existed. She knew that now with absolute certainty. She had lived it for 50 years and would live it for whatever time remained. That was the promise they had made to each other, renewed daily through action and devotion. To love, to protect, to cherish. Always. And Kyle had kept his word just as she had kept hers. Together, they had proven that the best love stories are not the ones that burn bright and fast, but the ones that glow steady and true, warming everything they touch, enduring through all seasons, lighting the way for generations to come. Their love was a beacon, a testament to what is possible when two people choose each other completely and without reservation. It was not perfect because they were not perfect, but it was real and true and lasting, and that was more than enough. That was everything.